It's finally May in the garden, my friends, which means if you don't have something in the ground by now, you might be falling a little bit behind, but that's okay. That's what we're here for. Myself, Jacques, and other members of our awesome Epic Gardening ecosystem are here with your in-depth planting guide for May, starting with my first pick, onions. But I'm not talking about some of these bulbing onions that I've got growing like crazy down this row. I'm actually talking about something a little bit easier for you beginners out there, which would be the bunching onions or scallions. Weirdly enough, when you hear bunching onion and scallion and then green onion, you lump those all into the same category, but green onions are actually different than bunching onions, AKA scallions. Green onions are basically baby versions of these large bulbing onions harvested early, whereas bunching onions or scallions, which are these three varieties right here, will never form a bulb this big. They might swell a little bit, like this Italian Red of Florence variety will have a light swelling if you let it keep growing, but they're just not bred to form huge bulbs, which is exactly why we like to grow them. And the nice part about growing a bunching onion or a scallion is that some of these varieties you can't find at the store, like Italian Red of Florence, the one I just mentioned. It's hard to find a red bunching onion at the grocery store, so just go ahead and grow it. Then you've got a variety that's been around since the 1700s. This is White Lisbon. Sow this one very densely and you'll get really nice thin onions because they won't have enough space to grow big, which is kind of what you want in this case. The final one I'll recommend is Tokyo Long White. The name kind of explains everything. They'll grow about 16 to 18 inches tall. And they're a nice mild flavor. They're heat tolerant. You can grow them in the summer, you can grow them in the fall. A really good all-around bunching onion. So let me show you how I like to sow bunching onions or scallions. I've got my Italian Red of Florence here. I do them in seed cells because I find it easy to transplant and pop into different parts of the garden, and that's where I find the most value growing these, is you can slot them into little raised beds or pockets that are empty and maximize your harvest and yield. So what I'll do is I got our Epic 6 cells here, and I will take one of the cells, I'll lightly compress it, and this is where it gets a little different than most other crops, is you just come in with the packet, and it's a dark black seed, so it's kind of hard to see, but you get very liberal with sprinkling. You can sprinkle like 10 or 15 seeds in one cell, and then just cover that up just like that, water it in. Don't need to thin it out at all, because of course it's a bunching onion.
Whenever I think of May, I think of summer just being around the corner, and summertime means that we're going to start collecting delicious, juicy fruit, so juicy that it dribbles down your cheeks as you bite into it. And for me, the one fruit I think of every summer is melons, and today we're going to plant them right here in my raised bed. Today I've chosen 3 different varieties for you guys, and all of them are pretty short season growers. They will reliably produce fruit even in a short season or cold climate, which is exactly why I chose them, because here in San Diego it actually doesn't get that hot. The first one that I have for you guys is the Minnesota Midget. It is an interesting name. I don't know if it'd be called that today, but the great thing about this is that it has a very short days to maturity, just 60 to 70 days, and the plant only really gets 3 feet long, which makes it great for even containers. Then we have the Hearts of Gold and also the Hale's Best Jumbo. Both of these are also varieties that are known to do well in northern or more cold climates, and they are under 3 months for days to maturity. So if you start them in May, you should be able to harvest them by August. When it comes to growing melons, they do prefer to be direct seeded. I'll give you a quick tip on how to transplant them if you need to, but first let's go over the direct sowing. When you're growing in a raised bed, they should do fine just as is with some great soil, but I always like to make sure that at the beginning of the season, I add a fresh layer of compost. And things like melons, squashes, they really thrive on rotting organic matter like this compost. So we're going to spread a nice little chunk out here. And the way I'm going to be growing them in the raised bed is by planting them near the corner. That way, when the vines emerge, they will trellis down the edges of the raised bed, spread through the pathways, and the fruit hopefully will be hanging on the sides of the bed, which means it won't sit on the ground where it can rot. So all I'm going to do here is I have that compost set up. I'm going to get a couple seeds, something like 2 to 3, just to improve my odds and make sure that I guarantee that I'm going to get some plants here. Then I'm going to clear off a little space here. I'm going to put 1 seed right there, 1 seed right there, and 1 seed right over here. Now, by the time these all emerge, I will thin them down to either just 1 or 2, depending on my mood that day, but let's just cover them up. I'll go through and water them, and they should do just fine as is. So now let me show you a quick way to make sure that when you transplant your melons, you're not actually ruining your season. Let's say you live in a climate that's so cold that you really do need to transplant your melons. If you do, make sure you use something that's a little bit bigger, something like these 4 cells. I like these because they also have the hole on the bottom, because the main thing when it comes to transplanting something like a melon is that you don't want to disturb the roots. So by having this deeper pocket, you have more space for the roots. Having the hole in the bottom makes it really easy to pop this seedling out just like that without actually messing with the roots. But first, let's get the area where we want to plant it ready. What I like to do whenever transplanting sensitive seedlings is I'll carve out the hole entirely beforehand. I want to make sure that the depth is pretty much exactly what it's going to be. Then I'll take my seedling, so I'll put my finger at the bottom here, pull up on that plant, just like that, and I'll gently lower it into the hole, pull the soil around it, and then water it in. So I didn't really touch the roots. They're able to settle in there, thrive on their own. We're not compacting it. And just like that, this should be able to thrive without any issue.
After being diagnosed with MS this year, one of my main goals, my main focuses in my garden this year is to grow more things that are anti-inflammatory, because that's what I need right now. And I don't think it's any secret that beans are one of the healthiest things that you could put in your body. So this year I am dedicating so much more space than I ever have in years prior to growing beans. And bush beans especially are some of my favorite beans to grow because they're easy to manage, they grow really compact, and they don't require any special trellising or kind of finicky space like that in your garden. I think I'm gonna be dedicating this entire new cedar bed to specifically beans this year, and I've got a couple of different varieties. So on one half, I'm gonna be planting this trio variety from Botanical Interest. We've got a couple of different colors of beans here. There's purple, there's yellow, and there's green. And I just think that the more visually appealing and colorful your food is, the more you're going to want to eat it. I feel like the eyes always eat first. So hopefully this will encourage me to eat more beans. And then on the other half, I'm gonna be planting cowpeas, also known as black-eyed peas. And if you're from the South, it's probably very nostalgic to you. This was one of my most comforting childhood memories, is my mom would always make black-eyed peas to go like on the side of our meal. So I'm excited to be growing those as well. And this variety is really interesting because it's called a pink eye purple hull. So it's actually a pink-eyed pea, not a black-eyed pea. I'm gonna be direct sowing these beans right into the bed, about 1 inch in depth and about 3 to 4 inches apart. And I'm not gonna be filling up the entire bed because I wanna leave a little bit of room so that I can succession sow and keep continuously sowing them every 3 to 4 weeks so that I have a continuous harvest. And I'm also gonna be planting marigolds all around the outside of the bed, kind of like a border to deter a common pest that we have for beans here in North Carolina, which is the bean beetle. If you know, you know. That's actually public enemy number 2 for me. I think I hate the squash vine borer a little bit more, but bean beetles really test my patience. But hopefully the marigolds will deter them.
It's May in Florida. I am already seeking shade and I've got myself a cold drink because the excruciating heat is here. I've got to make sure anything that grows in the ground is extra rugged. And that's why I'm going to start my summer season off strong with roselle. Roselle is a member of the hibiscus family. The plants can take an incredible amount of heat. They're also fairly drought tolerant once established, and they will withstand tons of humidity. So they're a perfect plant for a Florida summer. And this is a long season plant. I'm going to get them in the spring, and I'm going to have them grow throughout the spring. All through the summer, they're going to soldier through the hottest part of year. And then in the fall, they will start to flower and form their calyxes and be ready to harvest. So this is a long season crop over the hottest part of our year. As a member of the hibiscus family, it's also distantly related to okra. And we know okra loves the heat. It's a staple in the Southeast for a reason. So roselle is grown very similar to okra. If you can grow okra, you can definitely grow roselle. It's not hard to germinate roselle seeds. Just make sure that you give them very warm soil. 75 degrees and above is crucial for germination. These plants do not like it cold. You can start your roselle seeds in a tray and transplant them into the garden, or you could direct sow them. I've tried both with great success either way. This is a very easy crop for us in Central Florida. I'm going to space my plants a minimum of 3 feet apart. Ideally 4.5, 5 feet is going to give them plenty of space where they can truly spread out. These plants are going to turn into almost a small shrub. They're going to be as tall as me and almost as broad as my fingertips, so a big plant. And they're going to grow along the whole summer, providing edible leaves and edible calyxes, which are the modified petals that surround the flower bud to protect it. I'm going to sow the seeds a 1/2 inch deep, making sure to keep the seedlings well watered until they become established. These plants do eventually become fairly drought tolerant, but as they are germinating and growing along in the seedling stage, you do need to pay careful attention to make sure the plants don't dry out.
You might be wondering why I'm standing next to this rotting pile, aka my compost pile, and that is because this next pick is something that might solve a problem for you if you have compost at home, which is that inevitably any compost pile will attract some amount of rodents. But what if you could plant something that would attract something else to deal with your rodent problem? And that pick today is going to be catnip, which actually doesn't just attract cats, it's also drought tolerant, a beautiful flower, and can be drinking as tea. When it comes to starting your catnip, I like to actually personally transplant it into the garden, and I'll tell you exactly why. First, I'm gonna go ahead and fill this up with a little bit of seed starting mix. And the main issue that you get when growing catnip is that cats can go a bit crazy for it. So if I were to plant them out directly in the garden and a cat finds it before it has a chance to mature, well, there's a good chance the cat might actually roll over that plant entirely before it even has its chance to really bloom. Now, the cool thing about catnip is that it has really beautiful flowers. One thing that people don't realize is that it is related to mints. But the good thing is that it won't send out as many runners, so it won't take over your garden. It will drop a lot of seeds, but it shouldn't spread as aggressively as something like a mint. Now, the other reason I'm really growing this in particular is the fact that this is a very drought tolerant plant. It can handle full sun, it can handle missing out on a lot of water, which means that it should be able to produce reliable blooms all year round. And here in San Diego, this is actually hardy enough to become a perennial. So all I'm doing here is sprinkling the seeds, they're quite small, onto the surface. Then I'm going to press them in a bit. And actually, in this case, these don't need any light or anything special like that, so I will cover them back up with a little bit of soil. But before I plant this out in the garden, I'm going to wait until this plant is at least 6 to 8 inches tall, so it at least stands a chance against those hungry, ravenous cats.
If there's one thing about me, it's that I love fruit, and I love growing fruit in my garden. I'm constantly looking for fruits that I can add, but I like to grow my fruit in containers. I feel like it's just easier. I live in an urban environment, so I don't have a lot of like in-ground space to grow fruit. So I'm always looking for a container-friendly fruit to grow, and one thing that definitely makes the cut are raspberries. I like to grow a variety called Heritage. This is an ever-bearing variety, and how I like to plant them is I like to use a 20-gallon grow bag. The bigger the better for raspberries. If you can go even larger than that, 25-gallon, maybe 30-gallon, that would be great. And I do 1 plant per grow bag, and then I'll add a support, just like a simple kind of tomato cage, just to support those first-year canes as they're growing. And raspberries, like most berries, they prefer a slightly acidic soil. So what I'll do is I'll add some soil acidifier just to bring the pH down just a little bit so that they'll thrive a little bit better. And then as far as fertilization, I like to fertilize all of my berries in early spring, right before new growth starts to appear. And then I'll kind of hit them again with an organic, balanced, just a gentle fertilizer. Like I really like berry tone, but I'll hit them again halfway through the growing season, like May or June, just to keep them vivacious.
Now, I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but if you are a gardener in Central Florida and you are planning to grow lettuce or spinach over the summer, you don't have a shot. It is far too hot and humid. Pests, disease, and just the temperature alone are going to kill your lettuces and your spinach. Even if you try to grow them in the shade, it's just not in the cards for us. So the next best thing is to find some decent leafy green alternatives, and I have come across my clear favorite, and that is the edible leaf hibiscus. Edible leaf hibiscus is a member of the mallow family. It's a cousin to roselle and to okra. This plant family can take an incredible amount of heat and humidity, and this is no exception. I can plant these in full sunlight. Even in summertime, they're not gonna have a problem. The one care tip that I do recommend is that you space these plants out adequately, because they're gonna get huge. These plants can get from 8 to 10 feet tall if you don't prune them. So I'm gonna space them out about 3.5, 4 feet apart, and I'm gonna make sure and prune them back regularly. I love this plant because of the texture and the flavor of the leaves. The flavor is really mild and mellow. It's not something that's super punchy and going to dominate your dish. So it is more like a spinach or a lettuce in that it's a little bit more mild. The texture is buttery, soft, and not too rough or fibrous. Propagating edible leaf hibiscus is a breeze. This is one that is very easily rooted from cuttings. So here are my cuttings. I made sure that I left a few nodes on each cutting. They're a few inches long. I'm just going to pop them in a jar of water and put them in my windowsill in the kitchen. And in just a few days, I'm going to have roots and they're going to be ready to pot up. And there are a few different varieties to choose from, and they have very different leaf shapes. So you may find a few different varieties under the name edible leaf hibiscus. Another reason to love this plant, it is a perennial. So you're going to plant it once, set it and forget it. This is not something that needs to get reseeded each year. If you do experience cold in your area, I know parts of Central Florida and up into North Florida can get some pretty hard frosts and freezes. If you're worried about some impending cold, just take some clippings, take some cuttings, root them indoors, and then replant after last chance of frost has passed, and you're always going to have this source of heat-tolerant leafy greens.
There's nothing better in the garden than a fresh hit of tomato, except for maybe the salsa that tomato makes. And my next pick isn't actually a tomato, but it is somewhat related in a certain way, and of course I'm talking about tomatillos. And when I say related to tomatoes, I don't mean in the botanical sense. Tomatoes are a solanaceous style crop like peppers and eggplants, whereas tomatillos are a physalis, closer to a ground cherry type of plant. Now, varieties wise, it gets kind of interesting, and I encourage you to plant at least 2. The reason why, first of all, we've got Grande Rio Verde, which is a classic green tomatillo, and then we have a purple tomatillo, which looks quite beautiful. It has this sort of interesting pattern where it likes to have at least 2 plants because pollination is dramatically improved that way. So why not plant 2 different varieties, right? And you might be thinking, okay, well then I'm not gonna get the right fruit because it's gonna cross-pollinate. Not really the case. The seeds of those tomatillos won't be true to seed, but you don't have to worry about that because you're eating the tomatillo fruit that season. It's similar to planting peppers together. The seeds of all those peppers will have crossed and there'll be new hybrids, but you don't have to worry about that for the peppers you're actually eating that season. So I recommend planting 2 different varieties, and these are the ones that I think are cool. Now, when you grow tomatillos, the thing you have to remember is that unlike some tomatoes, they sprawl way more. They grow more like bushes than they do a tomato, especially like an indeterminate vining style tomato. You can get away with putting that on a single stake if you want to, especially if you prune it. Whereas tomatillos, they are much more of like a canopy style growth structure. They'll come up and out like this, which means that a squared off tomato cage that's very rigid and sturdy, like some of the ones we offer, is a really good idea for tomatillos to just keep them under control. They get way too crazy otherwise. The other thing I'll say is that they don't need as much care as a tomato. They actually prefer a little bit more neglect than a tomato might, whereas a lot of us like to baby our tomatoes, regularly fertilize them, prune them, etc., etc. With tomatillos, you can kind of just let them go.
As each month gets hotter and drier, I am also starting to lose more and more delicious, quick sauteing greens from my garden because they can't handle the heat. Now, there are a lot of heat tolerant greens out there, but honestly, most of them I really just don't enjoy eating. But there is one that reliably produces greens all year round for me, and that is Swiss chard. Now, there's a lot of different reasons to grow Swiss chard. One of my favorites is the fact that they actually come in a wide variety of colors, which means that you could make your garden not just interesting in colors, but also in textures. Now, at this point of the year, now that it's already a little bit warm, we are going to be direct seeding the Swiss chard instead of transplanting it. While Swiss chard can produce in the summertime, it doesn't necessarily want full sun. It does taste a little bit better in the cooler months, but will still produce tasty, reliable greens even in the summertime. The reason why I chose this particular place is that this section of my garden pretty much gets reliably shaded out by 4 p.m., which means it won't get roasted in the late afternoon sun. The 2 varieties I have to show you guys today are perpetual spinach, which is actually a chard. This is a variety I specifically requested we carry at Botanical Interest because it is so delicious. It doesn't have as much of that sort of irony taste that a lot of chards do have. So if you don't like that, I highly encourage you to try perpetual spinach. But if you are growing chard for the purpose of colors and textures in your garden, then you can't really beat the 5-color silver beet because each stalk will also change color. It's not just the leaf color overall, but the stalks themselves. So if you plant out a wide variety of those, you'll have a stunning color contrast in your garden. Now in this case, as I mentioned, perpetual spinach is my favorite. And the reason we're starting these seeds directly is that they're actually a relative of the beet family. So anything that has a root crop, which this technically is, even though we only eat the greens, doesn't like to be disturbed or transplanted. So instead what we're going to do is just direct seed these, and just like a beet, each one of these seeds has multiple seeds attached to it. So don't be surprised if you get multiple seedlings coming up on each one. So all we're doing is direct seeding. We're gonna walk away, and they should pretty much reliably grow on their own through the fall into the next spring, at which point they'll probably bolt.
If you guys know anything about me, you'll know that public enemy number one in my garden will always and forever be the squash vine borer. I have been trying to combat these little losers that are made out of pure evil for the last 5 years in my garden, and nothing has really worked except for planting resistant squash varieties like the Seminole pumpkin. The squash vine borer loves living here in North Carolina, and the Seminole pumpkin is the only pumpkin I've ever been able to grow successfully in my garden because it is just that resistant to squash vine borer. And not only is it resistant to SBB, it's also resistant to powdery mildew, which we also deal with a lot here. And this pumpkin is born and bred in Florida, and I'm sure Shannie can attest, if anything can survive in Florida, it can probably survive anywhere else in the world. I think Shannie has actually talked about this pumpkin before as well, so that's just 2 testimonies as to how good this variety really is. This is my squash trellis. It's made out of a cattle panel, and I like to grow my smaller fruiting varieties on this just to make use of some of the vertical space that I have in the garden. And I'll plant 1 to 2 plants on each side. Honestly, 1 plant is quite enough, especially if we're talking about Seminole pumpkin. It's very prolific. It's very spready, but I like to cram things in my garden and also just kind of have a backup. So I usually just plant 2 on each side, but I want to give them ample room apart, about 2 to 3 feet apart. And I am going to be direct sowing them right into the garden after our last frost. So May is the perfect time to get them out here in North Carolina.
My next choice is a plant that thrives in partial shade, which makes it a perfect choice for planting in the understory or lowest layer of a food forest. And that is ginger. This plant, in a culinary sense, needs no introduction. We all love ginger. It is perfect in baked goods. It's fantastic in just about every cuisine you can think of. Ginger doesn't need much selling as far as how it goes in your food, but I want to convince you that this is the best plant you could be putting in your garden as well. And my favorite way to grow ginger is either in a raised bed or container. My number 1 favorite container for growing ginger is actually a grow bag. I will put several plants in one of these extra large epic grow bags, and they are the perfect place. Ginger is planted not by seed, but actually by its sprouted rhizomes. So to plant this ginger, we are going to set the rhizomes about 1 inch beneath the soil, making sure that they're nice and well covered, and about 15 inches apart. We're also going to make sure that we are going to cut these pieces and then leave them to air dry for about a day so that their open wounds will cure. Otherwise, we would worry about a little bit of rot with the rhizomes. So provide those ginger plants good quality soil and regular watering, and they are going to sail right through the hottest part of the year, unaffected by heat, humidity, pests, or disease, and they're going to reward you with an abundant crop at the end of the season. You'll know when it's time to harvest because those bright green tops will start to die back and fold over and turn brown. That's when you know it's time to dig up those ginger rhizomes.
You know, there is one group of crops that I think gets unfairly dogged on, especially as you get to August, maybe September for some of you, because people think they just get too much of them, and I think that couldn't be further from the truth. And of course, I'm talking about squash. So you have 2 types or categories of squash you could grow. I'm gonna recommend one right now though. You've got your summer squash, which you would eat fresh and young. And then you've got your winter squash, which you let fully mature, and then you eat that matured plant, also great for storing. I think a lot of people get confused because they think winter squash you grow in winter. No, it's just something that you harvest when it's mature and you can eat it in winter because it's a great storing squash. The variety I have for you is called Table King. It's an All-America Selections winner, which means it is a very, very good squash. It's an acorn squash. It's been around since the 1970s. So the way to plant squash, especially if you're gonna interplant. Like right here, I've got some beans. If I had some corn and squash, I'd have what's called the 3 sisters method. But what you wanna do is plant squash on a mound and use more than 1 seed. And I do recommend direct sowing squash if you can get away with it. It's transplantable, but it's just easier to direct sow. So what you would do is you would come in and you could form a mound, just bring the soil up a little bit like this. Grab a few seeds, probably 2 or 3, maybe 4. I do a little depression in the mound like that. Drop the 3 in just like that. Cover that up, water that in and mulch it. And then once this sprouts, you've got a couple different tendrils that can come out and colonize this whole area, and you'll be in a good spot. A couple things you might run into when you're growing your squash. Number 1 is powdery mildew, which is a fungal disease. It's kind of like a milky white powder. It's really hard to get rid of. The best way is to keep thinning your squash leaves out. If you start to see it, keep the airflow going there, and it helps a little bit. There's also some sprays that can work. And then squash vine borer, which Meg on our team created a full video guide on. And then if you want a way to grow squash that is a little bit more space efficient and you're a smaller space gardener, maybe you're on a balcony, check out our vertical squash video. It works super well for smaller spaces. And until next time, you can always grab our seeds at botanicalinterest.com. Good luck in the garden and keep on growing.